Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds, and we have a lot to discuss this week, and I'm kind of piggybacking off of last week's episode. It's funny that I had pre-planned this episode, and then I just came back from a tour run, and honestly, it's reminding me of why confronting your good girl wound is so important. I still struggle with wanting to be liked and wanting to please everybody and wanting to be perceived a certain way. But at the end of the day, all it does is exhaust me, leaving me mentally drained, burnt out, feeling depressed, and just like I'm overextending myself. And for what? For what? And it's, especially as a creative, that is the quickest way to stifle your own self, your dreams, your creativity. And so I wanted to continue what I talked about last week of talking about the Wendy dilemma and how we, as the girls who are raised to be the good girl, are fucking exhausted. Being the good girl all the time is fucking exhausting. And this is, going back into the lore of where this podcast began. The title of the podcast, Not the Girl Next Door, that is literally my core wound in a title of how I don't want to be that girl anymore. I don't want to be if the only thing someone can say about me is, oh, she's so nice, and that's it, and that's all they know about me, I'm doing something wrong. I want people to, yes, know me and know, I want to be perceived a certain way. Look, here's the thing. Anybody who says they don't want to be liked and they don't care what people think about them, they're lying, okay? We all struggle with that to some degree of wanting to be perceived a certain way, even with posting on social media, right? We're managing our public perceptions. We're managing our, we're doing our own personal PR with how we post on social media. And that is, a highlight reel. And I tell people that all the time. And every time people see me, not every time, but when people see me, they're like, you always seem like you're doing so much and you're so successful and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, right. You're not seeing the core wounds underneath. You're not seeing the stress, the anxiety, and the ways in which I self-abandon myself to make these things happen or to make my clients happy. And that is where this week's episode is kind of coming from, in a sense, because I think it's so important to talk about these things as women, because we're raised, I've said it time and time again, we're raised to self-abandon. When we always talk about how you have to fill your own cup before you can fill everybody else's cup, right? And here's the thing about us as women, we'll only fill our cup up just enough where we're like, oh, that's fine. Then we start pouring into everybody else again, right? To the point where we have to start taking from our own cup again. Rarely do we pour into ourselves so much that the cup starts to overflow and it pours out onto the table and makes a freaking mess. And it's like, whoa, she's arrived. When the problem with that is when you're pulling from your own cup so much, eventually the well runs dry, and it's going to take you so much longer to recover and replenish. And so instead, taking that extra 10 minutes for yourself, those 30 minutes back for yourself, saying no to a certain obligation that normally would have said yes to just out of the need to please people, that little bit keeps yourself replenished so you don't burn out, so you don't feel so exhausted and overextended. And here's the thing, when I was growing up, I thought love was this easy thing, right? I thought everything was butterflies and rainbows and fucking unicorn shit. I really, truly thought that love should be easy. And when love wasn't easy, I thought it meant that I was hard to love and that I was difficult to love and that there was something wrong with me. And so I would self-abandon myself a little bit more each time to just be enough and, not stick up for myself, not speak up, not talk out of turn, and, don't cause a rift. Don't confront that person who hurt my feelings. Don't call them out for their shitty behavior. And the problem with that is when you do that so often, you no longer even know how to love yourself. And so loving yourself is what's supposed to be easy. Loving yourself should be the easiest part. Instead, a lot of us, we're our own first bullies. We're our own biggest bullies. And, they say that when you graduate high school, oh, you leave your bullies behind. But a lot of us have taken our high school bully with us, and it's our internal monologue. And a lot of that extends into the good girl wound. When you are revolving your life around other people, you're stifling your own power. And something with this conversation that I really think is important to discuss is how when we talk about centering ourselves and our own lives, people refer to it as you need to be a little bit more selfish in your life. And I think that narrative is honestly kind of a killer of this conversation, because obviously no one wants to be perceived as selfish. That's not a nice trait to have. No one wants to be called selfish. And so when you're saying, oh, you need to be more selfish with your own life and your own time, we're still having a little bit of shame attached to that, right? Like we're still somehow shaming ourselves for putting ourselves at the center of our own lives. It's exactly like, one time when I was in therapy, I said to my therapist, I was like, I just needed a day to rot and like be in bed and just having a rotting day. And she goes, you're allowed to have rest. She was like, even talking about it that way in terms of rotting and like you're wasting a day, you're still shaming yourself in some way. And I feel like we can apply that here of there is no shame and there is no selfishness of putting yourself at the center of your own life. That it can't obviously you center yourself too much, you do become that self-centered, egotistical person that we all don't want to be. But there's nothing selfish about making yourself the center of your own life and making yourself the main character of your own story. Why are we going to be a side character in our own story? That makes no sense. And so I think we need to reframe the way we think about centering ourselves in our own lives, because saying it requires selfishness is, I think, why a lot of people struggle with it. I think if anything, we need to focus on the fact of loving ourselves first. And that's how you do that. So when you're stuck in your good girl wound, that quietly runs your entire life. It forms the existence of just who you are. And so no matter how big your cup is, eventually that cup is going to run empty when you are so stuck in this good girl wound. And it stifles everything around you. And I know when we talk about the good girl wound, we normally think of in romantic relationships, but it's in all aspects of your life, your career, your pursuit of self, your career, to pursuing your passions, to your friendships, like everything it bleeds into. And you can sit there and say, I want this and I'm working towards this. But unless you have absolute certainty in yourself, in your heart of, no, I am going to become this thing, or I am this thing, like that is what it looks like to take your power back and how you know it's going to happen. And obviously people will say that's the power of manifestation, but I think to achieve your dreams, you require a certainty in your heart of knowing this will happen. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when this thing happens. And that's how you know you're actively working towards it. Because if you sit there and say, if, you still got one foot out the door. Oh, if I get that job, if I start this business, if I do this, if I do that, you've always got an escape route planned. And I think that's part of the good girl wound is you're still afraid to fully walk through the door and take up that space. And for so many years, even me with this podcast, for so many years, I was afraid to really dive into the podcast because I didn't feel like it was good enough. My production value wasn't great enough. My topics, my speaking, my confidence, my this, my that. And so when I would talk about the podcast, I'd be like, oh yeah, I've got a podcast and like I would like still physically shrink myself of like, oh yeah, I've got a podcast. But what about you? Like, no. Now when I speak about the podcast and the business, like I'm so proud of what I created and I'm so proud of this thing. And I hope that my pride is what inspires other women to take a chance on themselves. And I'll give you an example. Like I was with a couple weeks back, my manager got me a gig and we were actually working together for the first time. She was doing photo, I was doing video. It was an interior design event for this really talented interior designer here in Nashville. She was launching her business. And so Rachel and I was towards the end of the night. And Rachel was on the podcast last year. If you haven't listened to that episode, definitely check it out. It's a coffee chat with Rachel Deeb. 10 out of 10. She's an icon. But so we're talking with these women and they were asking her about her history. And then they turned to me. They were like, oh, so does your company have a name too? And so I launched into my spiel. And at the end of it, Rachel was like, oh my God, I've never heard you give your like TED talk before. That's so good. She was like, so impressed. She was like, And it made me feel such pride because now, you got your elevator pitch, and I'll give you guys the elevator pitch. So Next Door Creative actually came second to my podcast, Not the Girl Next Door. And so Not the Girl Next Door formed out of my need to confront my own wounds. And it came out of a need to heal and reconnect with myself. And so a lot of what we talk about in the podcast is is not just dating through the lens of, oh, men suck. It's through the lens of how am I showing up in relationships? How am I showing up in my own life? And working towards becoming our most authentic selves to attract the best kind of people for us. And so the podcast formed out of me self-abandoning all my life and wanting to be perceived as the girl next door. And so then when it came time for me to launch my business, it was really important to me that the branding aligned and it all felt like one company. And so Next Door Creative is, welcome. The tagline for it is welcome to the neighborhood, because I want every client to know that their story is heard, their story is valued, and I want them to feel like we're all in a neighborhood and we're all creating something special here. I think of my childhood neighborhood, how everyone was so close and helping others, and it just became a community, and that's what I want to foster with my company. And so then Not the Girl Next Door is kind of the antithesis of that, where we're breaking down societal expectations and the patriarchy and all these things. And I went on this tangent, and Rachel was like, oh my God, that is so good. She's like, I'm so proud of you that you've built that. And that felt really good. And again, I didn't give that spiel to them to be perceived a certain way or because I wanted that validation for them. It was just authentically from my heart of, this is what I'm building and have built, and I'm really fucking proud of it, and I'm excited to share it with people. But here's the thing, if I was stuck still in my old wounds, I wouldn't have been able to do that, and I wouldn't have be thinking of my own life and business this way. And so this is why the only way to confront your good girl wound and the fawning response is becoming your ideal self. And let's be so real. Being the girl next door and being fucking barefoot and pregnant on the front porch is not most women's ideal self. It's not most women's ideal life. For some it may be. And if that is truly what you want, I'm not talking to you right now. All right. This episode is for the women who know they're stuck in their good girl wounds, but can't seem to escape that cycle. And it took me so many years to break, and I'm still in it. I'm still struggling with it, because for every new chapter and experience in my life, it's like makes the wounds resurface, especially as with running my own business now. I don't want to ever disappoint clients. I want to go above and beyond for my clients. I want everyone to be so freaking happy. But the problem is bad clients do exist. And that is a whole other conversation. But let's be real. I don't believe being the good girl aligns with a majority of women's goals for their lives. And so how you become your ideal self, it feels so simple and silly to be saying this, because it's like, hello, Captain Obvious, but it all starts with our choices. It all starts with every single choice you make for yourself, from what time you go to bed, from what time you get up in the morning, to your morning habits, everything. That is how you build on the choices you make, the habits you're doing, what habits are supporting those choices, what environments you're putting yourself in, to who you're surrounding yourself with, to even especially online nowadays, who you surround yourself with is no longer just about the people you're friends with and in person with. It's about the people you engage with on the internet, and you follow and you interact with their content, you consume their content. I consider that part of who you surround yourself with. And so just like I always say, who we surround ourselves with is a reflection of who we are. I think the kind of content that you consume is also a reflection of who you are. And if you're only consuming content that is, bigoted or, transphobic, homophobic, or, you're just not, and don't get me wrong, it is important to get out of our own echo chambers and experience people from different races and backgrounds and all these things, but pay attention to the types of creators that you are platforming and elevating online, because again, and also learn discernment too. This is part of everything too, is knowing when to not just dogpile on to a certain controversy. I think of right now, Paris on TikTok, who is another feminist creator. I adore her. There's a lot of takes of hers that I agree with, but there's also takes of hers that I don't agree with. And that is okay. But she is being attacked right now on TikTok. And the only issue I have with Paris is that she apologized, because she has not, in my opinion, has nothing to apologize for. And in fact, a lot of her content to me is about her own experience and her own experiences as not just a woman, but a Black woman in America. And that's what a lot of my content is too. I'm not going to speak on the experiences of a Black woman because I'm not a Black woman, and vice versa. She's being canceled for, not speaking more on the experiences of trans women from my understanding. And that's not her experience. It's not something she'll ever experience. I think when we instead of people just trying to add on to the conversation with those points, they're just canceling her for not talking about it. And it makes no sense to me. But again, I think Paris is a prime example of, she's a woman who very clearly knows herself and stands on business. And even though she did apologize, I mean, when you're being dogpiled like that on the internet, I don't even know how I would react. But I just think it's so important that you know yourself, and if you allow yourself to be seen, being able to handle whatever comes your way. And she is someone who I would love to have on the podcast at some point. And I probably didn't do the best job explaining the controversy, the quote unquote controversy going around her right now, but I don't even fully understand the issue myself, if I'm being so real. Like, I'm like, what is the problem here? There's no problem here. I don't agree with everything that she says, but like, I think that's the point of feminism too, is us as women having these conversations and dialogues and like comparing experiences. Like, my experience, even as a white woman from Long Island, is going to be different from the experience of a white woman from Alabama. We're still going to have different experiences and issues with patriarchy as women. So shouldn't we all just be like comparing notes? And back to the conversation at hand, like I said, can you come here? Why are we whining? Can you come here? Come on mommy's lap. It's okay. Lay down. Rocco, lay down. No, you can't. Guys, do you see this? I can't. Buddy, is this the Rocco show? You cannot sit here the whole episode, dude. I love you so much. You can sit next to me, but the people can't see me really. Do you want to talk? Rocco, look at the camera. Buddy, look at the camera. Look over there. Look at the camera. Okay. Stop licking me. I love you so much, but don't lick my mouth. Your emotional state, your mindset, your habits, your choices, all of that builds who you are. But the thing is, I had to build who I was, as do I think a lot of women who struggle with the good girl wound. I had to build that in my 20s and instead of in my teenage years, because for so long of my life, I learned to disappear. And, all of this, I'm speaking on it so much because it isn't just like a theory and like a fun TikTok thing for me. I lived this, and I've lived this for so many years of my life. And growing up, I truly internalized that the only way to be seen and loved was by being the helpful one, being the one that no one has to worry about, being the one that was the most mature. And that's where the safety came from. And the one with the bright future. But the problem with that is, and it sounds so simple, right? It sounds so simple. Like, all you have to do to be a woman and be safe is just be mature, be helpful, be liked. Like, what could go wrong? But what I created for myself was a numbness to when things were wrong. And I became so good at showing up for everybody else that I no longer even knew how to show up for myself or what that should even look like. And so I essentially removed myself emotionally from my own life. And the thing about that, and the thing that nobody tells you about being the good girl and being in that wound, is that it doesn't actually keep you safe. I was raised to believe that that would keep me safe, and it didn't. That if I was just kind enough, that if I was pretty enough, that if I was smart enough, that I was good enough, if I was agreeable enough, nothing bad would ever happen to me. And then it did. And then it did again and again and again. And time again, I realized the very thing that I was taught would keep me safe was actually the thing that was putting me in harm's way. And that was my inability to speak up for myself, to stand up for myself, to have boundaries for myself, and to just like fucking be vocal about what I needed and wanted and what I didn't want and what I didn't need. My good girl wound is what kept me in harm's way. And the only thing that got me out of that and kept me like going forward is getting to know myself. So being the good girl didn't keep me safe. It kept me vulnerable. It kept me in harm's way at the hands of men. And it kept me ignorant to other people's motives, not just men, but like friendships too. It kept me ignorant to when people would be wanting to take advantage, when people weren't pouring back into me and weren't reciprocal in friendships. And that wound will continue to do that until you are so numb that you don't even know who you are anymore. And the thing is, because I was so busy looking out for everybody else and never considering myself. The thing about that too was no one was looking out for me either. And so that's how I got stuck in the Wendy dilemma, and I landed in Neverland, and I didn't even realize it. I said last week how there comes a point where we're no longer a product of our environment, but we're simply choosing to stay stuck in our pain. And I hit that point. And that is where this podcast began, because as much as I was so hurt by a lot of people who claimed to love me, I had to kind of hold myself accountable, because time and time again, I was allowing them to do that. And I was allowing them to come back into my life and just still going above and beyond for people who never once considered me. So how can you heal an abandonment wound when you continue to abandon yourself? You can't. It's not possible. And part of the good girl wound too is not just the fawning response that we talked about last week. And so if you missed that last week on the podcast, a lot of people who struggle with the good girl wound or the Wendy dilemma, they struggle with something called the fawning trauma response, which is essentially a survival mechanism where an individual is appeasing or pleasing a person to avoid conflict, deflect danger, or seek some form of connection. So instead of you being activated in your fight or flight, your body is instinctively deferring and submissing to the demands of the threat or the perceived aggressor. And so I did that so much. And like looking back, I see how I did that so much in my last relationship. And it's, traits of this are the people pleasing, the over apologizing, you're foregoing your boundaries, you're suppressing your emotions, like all of this feeds into the fawning response. And it's so much deeper than just an anxious attachment. But with that, it's not just about the fawning response. It's also about the good girl wound feeds into empathy burnout. And I kind of mentioned this last week of how there comes a point where you start to resent those around you because you're self-abandoning so much. And that's where this empathy burnout comes from. Because being the person who is always understanding of others is going to exhaust you. It is so exhausting constantly being understanding when it feels like nobody is taking the time to understand you, and like you feel like they just don't care and they don't consider you. And you're constantly having to rationalize why someone did what they did, why their wounds are reacting this way, but no one's doing that for you. And so when you're constantly doing that for everybody else, but it feels like no one's doing that for you, of course you're going to lead to be resentful and just burnt out. And the saddest part of empathy burnout and all of this whole thing is that the people that are doing it, they're going to do it time and time again, even though you ask them not to, even though you ask them to consider you. You beg and plead and you cry because they know that you're going to be right there waiting for them, and you're going to forgive them time and time again because you have done in the past. Why won't you keep doing it? Someone once told me that consideration is the highest form of love. And I have held on to that. And I've taken notice in my life when I'm considered and when I'm not. And the good girl wound, it doesn't just rob you of your boundaries. Frankly, you never created boundaries to begin with. You've never had boundaries as a good girl. So when you're finally trying to hold one, you're going to be perceived as the bad guy sometimes. And you have to get comfortable with knowing that. And because you're suddenly cold or difficult or you've changed. But the truth is, you really just stopped abandoning yourself. You didn't become cold. You didn't change. You don't let anybody tell you those things. The reality is people are going to misunderstand you, quote unquote. People are going to purposely misunderstand you when you suddenly start implementing boundaries that you haven't had before. And that's okay, because those are people that were never going to consider you to begin with. And so I don't want you, the thing about healing the good girl wound too, is that I think a lot of women, the pendulum swings too far the other way, right? And they just become cold. They do become cold. They do become, the walls go up. They are just so harsh. And I'm not saying that as you as a woman can't be harsh and all these things, but I'm saying a lot of women, they heal so much that they do just completely detach. And I don't think that is the goal. I don't think that should ever be the goal, is to just completely detach and put the wall up and never love again. I don't think that is the goal ever. Because I think the real power is being able to freely give love and be vulnerable with people and connect with people, but know when it's time to cut ties and walk away. I think that's where the real power lies in being a woman and being an empath. Because we're living in a time where love is being held hostage. Everybody wants a certain certainty before a certain green light before they give their love to somebody. And it's not just in a romantic way, but in friendships too. It's this like game of cat and mouse, tit for tat, keeping score. And, you need this concrete proof that it's safe to give your love somebody and that they're not going to hurt you. The problem is you're never going to have concrete proof. You're never going to have it. And so this is why it feels we're like deficient in love, because everyone's too afraid to be seen and be vulnerable, and it's cringe to be emotional. And, you're giving up too much too soon. You're giving them too much of your time, too much of your energy. Give what you would normally give to somebody and just see how they respond. Let people prove you wrong and know when it's time to take your energy back. I think that is where we should all want to get to. And that is where the real power lies. And I think if we all acted accordingly in that way, I think a lot of dating issues would go away. I think a lot of friendship issues would go away. A lot of miscommunication would go away, because the thing is, you need to do that. You need to be able to give your love so freely, but you also need to be able to trust in yourself that you'll recover if your heart is mishandled. If I stopped looking for love and I just was like, I still believe that I'm going to fall in love. Actually, I don't believe it. I know it. I know I'll fall in love again someday, maybe a couple more times in my life. I don't know. But what I do know is, because I have myself and I have this relationship with myself now, any other thing that happens, I'll be okay if someone breaks my heart again. Will it suck? Yeah. Will I cry? Yeah. Will I probably eat a pint of ice cream on my couch and not want to leave for a couple days until my friends drag me out by my hair? Yeah. But I'm going to be okay in the end. And so that is where, as women, you need to heal to. It's not about never loving again. It's about being able to freely give love, but knowing when to take your heart back. Because openness isn't the weakness that people like to make it out to be. In fact, I think it is such a strength to be able to be open and vulnerable and connect with people in that way. But when you're someone who knows what they bring to the table and you know all the love that you have to give to somebody, you also know that you can replenish your love, and you know that the right person will appreciate that love. And if someone doesn't want it, they can't accept it because of their own wounds, whatever the case is, that is okay. And it doesn't say anything about you. And again, as women who struggle with the good girl wound, that is like our kryptonite, right? The fact that we try to give somebody our love and it's just not working. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and you're like, why isn't this working? What if I just push harder? What if I just try harder? Like, it goes so much deeper than just the anxious attachment with the good girl wound, because it's not just about the wanting to be chosen aspect of it. It's that we almost need to be chosen for our survival as good girls. You should not have to exhaust yourself to be loved right and to be considered. And now that I'm considered by people who truly love me, I know what that feels like, and I know what that love feels like. And I've now, being on the other side of the coin, I can pick up so much more quickly when I'm experiencing being taken for granted and all these things. And it's only happened because I've been able to confront this good girl wound. And so back to how to become your ideal self and how to confront your good girl wound, it's not just about the how to do it, it's about your why as a person. Why do you feel like you struggle with this? Why do you get emotional about certain things? Why do specific situations cause you to go completely silent? Why are you passionate about certain things? Why do you love certain things? Like, your why is the center of who you are. It's not just about asking like what I want to do. It's why do I want to do something? Why do I feel called to this? Like, for me, the podcast, like, yes, I can sit here and say, oh, it was just about me, oh, I just wanted to tell my story. That's not enough, right? Why did I want to tell my story? Well, I wanted to tell my story because I want to be the person for somebody else that I wish I had growing up. And, if my pain can help one person navigate theirs, then it's all worth it to me. That is my why of doing this podcast. And that is my why. Why do I want to continue building my photo video business? Oh, because I also want people to know that they can tell their stories. Like, I want to help people tell their stories because I think I love storytelling. I've been a storyteller since I was a kid. And, now that I've centered and I know who I am, it's made everything else in my life so much more easy to navigate. And so being able to have a good mindset and good emotional state and will give you the awareness of yourself. And it's not just about having the emotional tools to navigate life. It's the literal foundation of who you are. When you I talk about this with branding with clients all the time, and I think we can really apply it to this episode, but I look at your first branding session as the foundation of who you are. So it's not necessarily the thing that is going to be seen the most down the line, but it's the foundation, right? You're going to add more and more on top of it to get to the completed project. And so that's how you have to look at your why. Your why is the foundation of who you are. And everything else, your career choice, your habits, your friends, your environment where you choose to live, all of those other things are the foundation that you're building on top of your why to build who you are and become who you're meant to be. And knowing the why is what's going to help you get clear on your purpose in life. And I feel like a lot of people lack purpose in life. And I think that's, it's a genuine struggle. And I understand why. It feels like such an immense question of what is my purpose in life and why am I here? But that's why it's so important to ask yourself these questions, because you can't follow a why that you haven't found yet. You're not going to figure out your purpose if you can't answer these questions for yourself. And so a lot of the times I think people think that the answer is they need more time, and I need more time in a day. I need more time to do this or that. You don't need more time in your life. You need more of the courage to be who you are and be who you are becoming. And becoming grounded in that is what's going to give you the certainty to navigate your life and to confront your good girl wounds. Because continuing to live in your good girl wound, and when I was continuing to live in my good girl wound, it wasn't just robbing me of happiness and, boundaries, because it was robbing me of those things, but it was robbing me of the chance to be who I was really meant to be. And that's what it's doing to you when you're living in that good girl wound. It's robbing you of becoming who you're meant to be. And I think the thing is, somewhere deep down, I always knew that. I always knew that something felt off. And I think if you look internally to yourself, if you're struggling with this, you probably feel the same way. And that's probably why you're here. That's probably why you've made it to this point of the episode. And so the first step is recognizing that you're living in this wound. The next step is asking yourself the questions that I talked about in this episode. I highly, highly suggest getting a journal and answering all these questions in that journal. Ask yourself too, if I was living as the version of myself that I want to be, what would my habits be? What would my day look like? If I stopped living for the perception of others and started living for myself, what would my life look like? What would I be doing? What would I eat? What would I wear? Where would I live? Get so real with yourself about that and write it down. And, write down what your current habits are versus what they should be. See where you can improve. And the thing is, it's just like a house. It's not going to be built in a day. It's not going to be built in a week. It's not going to be built in a month. Something that is meant to last and is going to have a strong foundation is going to take time. And I keep doing this with my hands, and I need to stop talking with my hands. I'm so Long Island Italian. Anyways, but I hope that if you've listened to this far and to this episode, that maybe it kind of gave you a little bit of clarity on who you are and where you're going and what you're still struggling with. Let me know, you guys. I'd love to hear from you guys too on what it is you're struggling with and, what else you want talked about with this topic. I'm always open to suggestions. The DMs the DMs are always open for those purposes. But that is all I've got for you guys this week on Not the Girl Next Door. Please, please, please make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Don't forget to sign up for emails through my beacons. As you guys know, I said this last week, I have closed the snail mail club. It's just unfortunately not great timing. I don't have the time I would like to commit to it. But I will be launching a Substack in its place. And so I will keep you guys posted on when that is ready. It's still going to feature letters and journal entries from me. And, I would love to find a way to include my photo prints in that as well for you guys to have and download. So I'm working on all of that. But that is all for this week's episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I will see you guys next week. Bye. Oh, and don't forget to have a good day, even if you don't want to. Bye for now.